which the crop rotation which we developed to feed our system with mulch, enough mulch, all vegetables. So we have 2 biomass years and 5 vegetable years in order to supply all the vegetables with mulch. So it's two biomass years with sorghum, Sudan grass, and each year a winter hard cover crop. I showed some examples of crops which we do, and the machinery we use and also other farms use. And yeah, we have very good results with cabbage or celeriac, leeks, and so on. With lettuces, we sometimes struggle, but the main point is here to be successful to plant high. I showed the carrots, which we do, and the way we want to do that in the future, because we didn't do them with mulch yet, but we are heading to it. Yeah, there I stopped, and I wanted to show you still the onions. You talked about a picture of onions in South America. We are not able to seed them directly. That's why we transplant the onions as well. And the onions are actually a very interesting crop for us, because the onions, they never make a canopy closure. So weeds is the issue of onions, actually. And that's why we love to do them in mulch. What you have to be aware of, though, with the onions is that the mulch material is short, it's cut short, so that the harvesting will run smoothly, and the mulch is falling through the machine on the ground again, so that we don't have a mixture of onions and mulch while we dry the onions on the field. That's a key point which you have to watch out. So the perfect mulch, in my opinion, is a shortcut, high CN ratio mulch. For example, rye mulch, which we conserve as silage over winter and spread out in springtime. What we observe with the onions is that they take about 2 weeks longer than the onions without mulch. That's due to the water supply. That's due to the nutrient supply, which is more even over the time. So
down out there.
So the onions are their physiology. Sorry, somebody has a question? Okay, maybe not, just the microphone also on. So what we see in these 2 weeks, which they take longer to grow, they create higher yields, and these were the yields.
Got fucking David's ears perked up.
Sorry, somebody is talking with the microphone on. Just check.
Yeah, somebody needs to mute, please.
Catherine, iPad is on, and yeah.
Okay, please continue, Johannes.
Okay, so what I was saying, I think, yeah, these 2 weeks, which they take longer, they are able to create more yield, and we had these yields this year. So we had 645 Dezi tons. So that's a German metric, I would say. That would be 64 tons per hectare of yield without mulch, and 82 tons per hectare with mulch. So about 28% more yield we gained with the mulch system in onions. So all in all, onions are a very profitable crop for us as we do them. And yeah, just we have to watch out for the machinery that all works with the mulch. It's the only crop which has difficulties with the mulch while harvesting. So it's important to have short mulch material.
With the wide CN ratio, you don't have any deficiency of nitrogen at any point?
No, actually not. In this case, with the onions, they are planted early, so we don't have a cover crop before the onions, which we use as mulch. So all the mulch we put there, we have to spread it on that crop or on the field before the crop. So there might be higher mineralized nitrogen in the soil, higher than under a cover crop. That's the first point, I would say. And the second point is, here we had a CN ratio of 25 in the onions. The mulch material had a 25 CN ratio on that picture. And you know that these onions, they were really growing like crazy. I was really afraid they had too much of nitrogen. You see the leaves, they were about 60 centimeters tall. And that was, I would say, the top. I would rather fertilize less, actually.
Johannes, where do you suppose all that nitrogen came from? Why are your systems so high in nitrogen?
That's the mulch material. That's the fertilizing effect from the mulch material.
So because the mulch lays on the surface, then the soil is able to release the nitrogen more efficiently so that there's no tie-up than if it were incorporated?
No, actually, not the soil releases more nitrogen. Actually, the mulch releases the nitrogen. So the soil releases less nitrogen because it's colder, but the mulch releases the surplus. So
the 25 CN ratio is sufficient for a rapid release then?
Yes.
Okay.
Not a rapid, but continuous.
Adequate. Yeah.
Yeah. I will talk about this in detail in a few minutes.
Can you remind us your organic matter percent? I remember from yesterday that it was quite high.
Yes. We have about between 4 and 5%, which is pretty high, especially on that field. That's the highest we have on that field, where we grew the onions. So that might take an influence, definitely.
Did you start with that much, or is that the result of your system bringing it up?
We started with about 3.5%. Yeah. And we have about, we take soil samples and we take humus contents regularly, and we can see that about 0.3 percent points per year can be built up with this mulch when you consequently do that. Yeah. And Tom? Oh, sorry, and Klaas also, but Tom first.
Yeah, do you use compost in your system at all?
No.
No compost. Okay. And I guess, did you pretty much just try to explain why you have such an increased yield in the onions with the mulch system versus without?
The main reason, I think, is fertilizing. The mulch releases nutrients, and that's the main effect. That's the main effect we saw with this test this year. So we had some plots in there in the field where we compared the yields and all the things we wanted to see. So I guess it's mainly nutrients and water as well. So the water has a high effect as well. We see that in other crops too. So these two things are very regular under a mulch cover, water and nutrients. Whereas without mulch, you have peaks sometimes. You have a peak in the beginning of nitrogen release, later on less. And with the water, you have bare soil, the sun is going down, the evaporation is higher. And these are the things why the yield is higher. And another thing, maybe, sorry, is that the CO2 emission from the mulch is fertilizing the plants as well. So we have a CO2 fertilizing effect here as well.
Yeah. So when you say without the mulch, would that mean that would be a tillage system?
Yeah, that was a tillage system. I mean, we didn't till, we didn't plow, but we tilled the soil, yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Do you ever get an off-gassing of an anaerobic conditions underneath that mulch where it could be a problem to have too much mulch?
It can happen, but here again, the CN ratio is the crucial point. So CN ratios above 15, they are not problematic if you don't increase the mulch layer above 10 centimeters, or if you don't do more than 10 centimeters. If you have very narrow or very low CN ratios, like grass clippings from your yard, which you weekly mow, this would cause problems. You know that probably that smell from the compost of grass clippings. So, but we don't go in this area of the CN ratio. We stay above. So we never have an anaerobic condition under a mulch. When you smell it, when you take away the mulch, it smells like forest soil, actually. And that's a very healthy aerobic decomposition.
Phil?
What is your irrigation system on those onions? Just curious, like how did you water them?
We watered them with 20 millimeters. That would be less than an inch. We just once irrigated them with how do you call that? Pivoting irrigation.
Sprinklers.
Sprinkler, we call them sprinklers.
Yes, with sprinklers. But I will talk more about irrigation later. The sprinklers are actually very high in water loss, so we have a different irrigation system as well. We have like dragging hoses, which we drag hoses on a bar through the field. I will show you a picture later.
Phil, you had a question?
Scott?
You're muted at the moment, Phil.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, Alman kind of asked my question on irrigation, but the 89 plants per square meter, that's a pretty high plant population. And to get that in with transplants, that's pretty interesting. So how many lines per your 1.8 meter beds? And then what's your spacing with onions?
We have 4 lines on that 1.80 meter bed again, like with all the crops. And we have 15 centimeters between each plant, between each seedling, but each seedling has 5 to 7 plants. You see that? So we always have these clusters of plants where we have 5 to 7 plants per seedling.
And you can still get good bulbing with all those seeds close together?
Yeah, definitely. We have a very nice sorting, as you see in the picture. Actually, that's how they are. They're about 60, 70 millimeters diameter. So
6 seeds per transplant, or 6 plants per transplant, and 15-inch spacing.
Not
Okay,
15 inch, in 15 centimeters.
I'm sorry,
15
centimeters.
Yeah. We always go through the crops each year and see, can we go more dense? We always measure, and so we go as dense as possible. Yeah.
How deep is the soil sample you take when you calculate that the organic matter percent is calculated from?
That's always 30 centimeters.
Okay, for 30 centimeters.
Yeah.
That's a lot of organic matter on a hectare.
Yeah. Yes.
One comment
Okay.
about the onion size. Being from Europe, I know that the standard onion size on European grocery store shelves is much, much smaller. Like in the US, the standard seems to be huge. Like I always think that onions here are just incredibly large.
Okay. Yeah, that's maybe a good point. Yeah, which you have to consider. So they don't take everything too serious what I say, but that's how customers want it. They want to have it 6 centimeters diameter in average. Yeah.
Do you ever have enough rainfall to cause an anaerobic condition in the soil?
To cause it anaerobic or aerobic?
Anaerobic. We have a problem at least in the east. Our rainfall intensities with climate change have increased by 70+%. And we sometimes have such extremely heavy downpours that the soil will become anaerobic for a period and denitrify.
Mm-hmm. We used to have these situations sometimes, but not in the last 6 years. Maybe last year we had also quite strong rains, but we have 1 hectare of waterlogged soil. So we, especially on that field where the onions are, we can have these conditions. And these conditions, of course, harm the onions. They would die there. I've seen it already, but we can have that on that specific field.
Okay. Thank you, Johannes. Please continue on.
There's still a question from Scott. He raised his hand, I see. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I
Yeah,
missed that.
2 questions. When you say you plant dense as possible, I'm assuming that's for weed control,
No, for yield.
just for yield. Okay, and the other question is, are you building up a thatch or a mulch over time? Or every year, has it basically broken down and you're starting again?
I'm sorry. I think I didn't get the question right.
You're putting mulch down every year, but are you having a natural, over time mulch building up? So after 7 years, you're starting with say 10 centimeters there anyway, or is it completely decomposing over the year and then you're reloading the next year?
We never build up mulch layers. Actually, they are completely gone after 1 season. So when we harvest the Brussels sprouts now, there's almost nothing left, which from what we applied for the planting.
So you get a cover crop planted as soon as possible after that? Then
Yes.
depend on rain to get it germinated? Or you have
Yes.
the moisture to plant into?
Depends a bit on the year. Normally, we have the moisture to plant into. On some years, it's difficult, but normally in October, latest, we get the rain. And then it just continues raining over winter. So we have half of the, so this year we had about 700 millimeters of rain, 600 something, almost 700 millimeters of rain. And half of it falls between October and March, and the other half in the season. So 300 millimeters in the season and 400 in the winter, I would say, about.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Then we go on with the, with a small summary. I want to talk about the potentials now, which we want to use. So in October, I summarize again, we created a mechanical tilth through soil cultivation. We stabilized that, or we did a biological aggregation of that mechanical tilth by roots, through roots of the cover crop. And we created a beautiful soil structure, as you see in the picture. Now we come to the harvest. It's October again, and these nice soil structures we still have, we could preserve that soil structure. And as a German soil scientist said once, he said, only when the topsoil stays crumbly for the entire period of vegetation and does not break down under the silting effect of the water, we can speak of tilth. So this we could only reach through permanent roots in the soil. So we had a cover crop, and then we are flame mowing the cover crop, planting into that, directly new roots were coming. And so we always had roots over one period of a year. And questions now, how do we go about this potential of soil structure, of tilth? And the other point is we have often still maybe 2 centimeters, I would say 0 to 3 centimeters of residual mulch laying on the soil surface. So depending on the length of the time period, how long a crop takes. So shorter crops, they leave more mulch, and longer crops, they leave less mulch. So these two potentials we have now. And the question is, how do we preserve these things? First, maintaining the tilth. For that, we, as I already said, we have permanent wheel tracks. We do controlled traffic farming. And like this, we never drive into that tilth. We experiment with green wheel tracks, but we are not very successful yet, but we are still experimenting. Now, the other question is, how do we go about the mulch material, which might be still there? That goes a bit in the direction of Scott's question. So when we harvest, we have the crop residues, of course, and we flail mow them after the harvest. So we have both the residual mulch and the crop residues laying there. We chop the residues very coarse, not too fine, so that we have not too much nitrogen release. And now is the question, how do we go about the mulch material? We had many years in the beginning where we incorporated the mulch material at the end of the season, because we said we have to sow the cover crop and we couldn't sow into a mulch layer. So the residues and also the residual mulch were disturbing. And but we really destroyed a lot what we built up in that time period. We saw the earthworms laying there and so on. We had to do many passes in order to get the seedbed ready. So the question was to us, how can we lift up the mulch, put the seeds under it, and put the mulch back? We could do that with a direct seeding drill, actually. But this would have one disadvantage. The disadvantage would be the weeds, which might have come up, and also the crops, which can emerge again, they wouldn't be terminated. So we would need a shallow undercut, actually. And we solved that question with that machine. So what did we do? We took a rotavator. You say rotavator or rototiller? And it is a reverse rototiller, actually, which is also called stone barrier. And we put, how do you call that? These knives, which have a 90-degree angle on that machine. And they are overlapping, these two, from both sides. Yeah, so we can create a very even shallow undercut with that machine. Undercut, I mean with that about 2 or 3 centimeters. We go down in the ground with this machine. So what the machine actually does, it undercuts everything what is growing there. It lifts up the mulch material and the crop residues which are still on the surface. And here, there is an area where we have space to drop the seeds. So the seeds are blown with air into a seeding bar and are distributed evenly on the bed. And then the mulch material is flying, or is laid again on the soil surface. This machine, yeah, like this, we are also able to seed under very dry conditions, because the capillary system of the soil, it can transport still water to the surface, and the seeds are actually put on that surface where water is reaching the seeds. So we are not going deeper in the ground on that stage. And that's one, yeah, it's an advantage we see, that we don't go deeper. And the other thing is that we are very gentle with the soil, because this machine, it works from the side and lifts up the soil like a shaver. It never goes from the bottom to the top into the soil. So the compaction of the working of the cultivation horizon is not there. Yeah, and this machine is placed on 2 rollers, one in the front, one in the back. And the top hitch of the 3-point hitch is in a long hole. So the seeding depth is controlled very precisely. Could you follow me?
Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
What is it that evenly distributes the seed all throughout the area? The seed is coming in from 2 sides, or is there a bar all the way underneath that space that's dropping seed everywhere?
I would like to show you a picture. I don't have it with me now. No. And it's actually distributed, it's not blown in from the sides. It is a bar there which has how do you say, openings of about a few inch, and the seeds are I would like to have English as my mother language now. So the seeds are
Wie sagst du das in Deutsch?
cool. Also das sind Öffnungen, wo der
Openings.
Samen,
Yes.
das Saatgut sozusagen über kleine Prallteller gleichmäßig auseinander gestreut wird.
So the nozzles go against plates that distribute the seed evenly.
And
baffles.
these openings are about 20 centimeters wide. And there are small bars in between, so that the seeds there, distributed evenly. Yeah. So we have 8 openings on that cedar bar down there. Thank you for the translation.
You're welcome. We use an air seeder too. My son interned in Germany and brought back some of the technology that you have.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an airstream which transports the seeds. So there's some pressure on the seeds, and they distribute even.
It's also a very precise metering that you can with the air system, much more than our mechanical ones, because you don't have the problem of it dropping and bunching.
Yeah.
So you get a better seed uniformity distribution.
Yeah. And the technology from Lena, we buy it, and it's pretty cool, actually. It's connected with the tractor, and when I lift the machine, it stops directly and stuff like that. So it's a nice machine. Yeah. Catherine's iPad. Your microphone is still mute.
It looked like with this air seeder, it was mainly cereal. How does it do when you're doing mixed cover crop? I mean,
We do mix
with the
cover
other-
crops.
If you're putting vetch or peas in with it.
That's what we do, actually. We have a mixture of rye, vetch, peas, and crimson clover. And,
Okay, and it distributes it pretty nicely then.
yeah. That's not an issue. That's really nicely distributed. Yeah. Yeah, just two videos about this machine. You hear the air seeder. So an advantage of that machine is also that we can pretty fast, pretty soon after harvest, or even while harvesting, we go with this machine. So it's just one pass after harvest and we are done. And that is now after carrot harvest, and the soil is pretty uneven. And because it's reverse rototiller, it really evens out the surface. And we just have to make one pass in very chaotic situation, and seedbed is pretty good because the front roller rolls it down, and then the rotor seeder pushes the soil before itself, and like this it evens out hills and valleys. And that's one thing. So that's really an important issue, because in Germany the October is pretty critical always. It can be very fast too wet, so we have to put the seeds in on time, and like this we have just one pass after harvest or while harvesting, and the cover crop is in very precisely. And here you see now a seeding under very heavy residual mulch, and here you see about 3-4 centimeters of residual mulch after zucchini under wet conditions. And here you see how the mulch is lifted up and put down on the soil surface again. And here you see the cover crop which already emerged, next bed, mixture of veg and rye. And here you see the cover which we go in with in winter. And down there you see the crimson clover, the winter peas.
On the web, you need to download the Zoo app.
And the rye. Yeah, so that's how it looks like when we seed it. So here we actually just lift up the mulch. It's practically a no-till planting. Yeah, but not completely.
Are
Yeah,
slugs or wireworms ever a problem in your system?
Say again?
Are slugs or wireworms ever a problem in your system with eating the seedlings or eating the seed?
Actually, it decreased that problem. In the beginning, before we actually did mulch systems, we had pretty high pressure of slugs, especially. And we don't have an issue since 4 or 5 years now. Because why? We were asking why did they decrease? I think there are different factors. One factor is when you open the mulch layer and look into the soil, there's a lot of life, especially in that area between the soil and the mulch. And that's the area where the slugs also like to stay, but there are many predators for the slugs. These black beetles, for example, they eat the slug eggs, and we have a lot of them now. So I think the community of soil life really regulates the slug population. That is what we see. And yeah, that's not an issue. Maybe sometimes at the edge of some fields near rivers or forests, sometimes some slugs are just intruding our fields. Yeah.
And you don't have wireworms then?
Wireworms we do also have, especially when we turn grassland into fields. Then the first 2-3 years we have issues, and then they're gone, actually.
Okay, good. The theory that one of my mentors had was that the slugs were a symptom of indigestion, that the soil biology was not able to properly process the organic material.
Mhm. Yeah, I can imagine. Or also, what I heard also, I cannot prove it to you, but that anaerobic decomposition of organic matter also, or anaerobic situations in the soil really attracts the slugs.
Yes.
And Catherine's iPad, I'm sorry, I don't know your name still.
Yeah, Johannes, I'm sorry, I didn't change my wife's. It's still Foster.
Okay.
It looks like you're still tilling, if I'm getting it right, with the reverse rototiller, 2 to 3 centimeters. So let's round it off, say an inch.
Yes.
So that's pretty good. It looks like the soil is disturbed. That residue is really incorporated nicely. And in an inch, that's pretty amazing. We can do the kind of the same thing, but we have to use 3 inches. Just because if we're undercutting, we can't undercut as precise as your system with your reverse tiller, but we can undercut 3 inches. We can use a power harrow, and then we can plant right into that. It looks pretty similar.
Yes.
But you're doing it in a third of the depth of what we're doing. And so my question is, how much benefit is that less depth of, say, 1 inch to 3 inches when you're still not disturbing below 3 inches?
I mean, why do we want to go as shallow as possible is we want to seed here. And when we want to seed, we don't want to mix the soil with the residues, because keimhemmend, was heißt keimhemmend, Klaas?
It prevents germination.
Thank you. Yeah, there's some processes which prevents germination. Yes, when with the decomposition of fresh material. So we want to have this to separate this process from the germination locally. So the decomposition should take place on the soil surface and the germination should take place underneath. Otherwise, the germination rate would go down, especially also under dry conditions. We break the capillary system of the soil, and we want to place the seeds on that capillary system. So when we go like 3 inch with our soil cultivation, we would put the seeds into the dust under dry conditions. But like this, we put them on the soil which is not cultivated, and like this, water is there. So these are the 2 reasons why we don't go deeper than an inch.
Is it because of your machine that you can go so shallow? The power harrow is a Kaiselegge. We have several Kaiselegge.
Yes.
So that would they have to go deeper than your machine?
Yeah, normally the power harrows, they go deeper. Yeah, they. I know of some power harrows which have like a plate under these harrows, and they can cut very shallow as well. But normally it's just like this, and it turns the soil. And like this, I think the precise undercut is not possible. And we use the reverse rototiller to lift up the material so that the seed is placed under the mulch layer. That wouldn't be possible with the power harrow as well. So these are the thoughts behind that machine.
You also save a lot of energy.
Yeah, yeah.
By not going so deep.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm not killing as many earthworms as when I go that deep.
I have a question about your furrows, and do you use GPS to keep your tractors running in the same? Because it looks like you really don't use a a shaped bed in the
Mhm.
same way that we do. You kind of just drive over the same place every year, and then when you do you cultivate afterwards, and how do you keep the furrows clean? I'm just curious about how your process there is for the furrows and driving over the beds.
Yes, we use GPS steering systems in order to keep the same tracks every year. That's one point, and we have a flat bed, so we don't have lower tracks. We used to have lower tracks actually, but we went away with it. We didn't do it anymore because we had some problems there with the mulch. When you have the edge, the mulch sometimes breaks off when you plant next to the edge, and then weeds would grow at the edge. So this was the main reason why we went away from that raised bed. And we cultivate the whole area. So our rotavator is at the moment 170 and our beds are 180, but we will buy now a 185 so that we work all the area once a year. But we don't go deep. We don't loosen the tracks. They stay firm. Yeah, and Brian?
Yeah, Johannes, if you could plant into the mulch and have it covered back up, like with a no-till drill, would you consider doing that? Or is this way of planting, you think, superior to a no-till drill?
I'm sorry, I lost a few words due to connection. Can you repeat?
Yeah, I apologize. My internet's not the greatest out here in the country. Like for us, we have a coulter sled that we put in front of our drill that cuts the mulch, and then the press wheels in the back do a fairly good job of covering that seed placement up. I'm just curious, I'm sure you guys have the technology there. Why
Or
you
summer
wouldn't
squash.
do that? Why would you choose this way of doing it versus just a normal drill?
Okay. Yeah, actually, we want to do it in one pass. We want to terminate weeds and crops, whatever is there. That's the first thing. We want to lift up the mulch material and leave it on the surface after planting. So both topics, they can be only done with that machinery, I guess. So I would like to have a precise seeding under the mulch layer with the termination of weeds.
The no-till drill wouldn't terminate the weeds.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And it usually disrupts the mulch somewhat.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for the questions. So we reduced quite some tillage now. And in the beginning, when we started, we thought that with no till, you can increase soil fertility. Now I say the reduction of tillage is not the condition, but the result of soil fertility. So when we have soil fertility, we can do no-till, but we do not do no-till for soil fertility. Yeah, because no-till is really quite demanding, and soil fertility is keeping the yields with the no-till system. Otherwise, we have a real yield reduction. Okay, I would like to talk about nutrients now. Can I? Good. Now the question, of course, is what's the nutrient dynamics in a mulch system. When we open the mulch, we see that, what you see now in the picture. You see many fine, hairy roots growing out of the soil into the mulch layer. That's not mold, that's roots. And the question is, what do they take up there? There's a book which is talking about coltan fertilization. I'm not sure if that is a terminology in the US. It's about ammonia nutrition of the plants. It's a conventional way of fertilizing. And this man, he describes in his book that organic nitrogen, which is built in organic matter, is mineralized first into ammonium and then into nitrate, right? We know that. So ammonium is toxic for plants. So it cannot be taken up as ammonium. Nitrate is not toxic, so it's not an issue. So, but ammonium can be taken up in a way by the plants as well when there's enough energy from the photosynthesis for that fine hairy root tips to change the ammonium into amino acids and amides and so on. So ammonium can be taken up by a plant when photosynthesis is there. Nitrate is taken up by the plant when transpiration takes place of the plant. So here we have exactly these fine roots which we see in the conventional ammonium fertilization systems in the mulch material. So I guess these plants, they can take up ammonium, do take up ammonium here in that system. So it's a way of nitrogen uptake which is very healthy. The plant can use nitrogen when photosynthesis is taking place. It can build plant tissue from it. So that is happening in the mulch layer. I think some other professors can talk more about it, but that's what I know about it and what we see on our farm. So in natural ecosystems, the nutrients are always accumulating on the soil surface. Nature never incorporates nutrients. They're always accumulating on the soil surface in the form of mulch material. So plants are used to that system. They're much more used to that system than to bare soil systems. Question is if our breeds are, but plants in general are. So the question now is what we have, how much nutrients is in such a mulch layer and how much is available to the plants and when is it available to the plants? These questions I would like to answer now. So for that, we are doing some field trials on our farm and also some other universities and are doing research here in Germany about that mulch system. It's pretty well covered now, the science here. So what we did in our farm is a test where we had grass silage, clover grass silage with a CN ratio of 16. I'm sorry, that's still German. I forgot to translate. Then we had a clover grass fresh, which had a CN ratio of 20. We had a grass material of mulch with a CN ratio of 25, and the mixture of rye and veg with a CN ratio of 30. And then we had a mulch material, that's the blue things here on that field, a mulch material, it's a compost fleece actually, of about ½ inch thickness without any nutrients. So we had this trial in order to find out how much nitrogen is available for the plant in Abhängigkeit in depending on the CN ratio of the same material. So what did we find out? First of all, the question is, what is in the mulch material? So we had the rye hairy vetch mixture, and we had about 1 kilogram of dry matter per square meter. And we had 141 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. So now I'm sorry, that's not per acre, not pounds per acre. I hope maybe we can find a way to change these numbers.
A kilogram per hectare is about 9/10 of a pound per acre.
How much?
About 9/10 of a pound, if I remember right.
9/10 of a pound. Okay.
Because a hectare is 2.49 acres and a kilo is 2.2 pounds.
9/10. So we always have to calculate with times 0.9, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So 141 times 0.9, it would be 126 kilograms of nitrogen per, not kilograms, but pounds per acre. This is what we have there. So we have two numbers here. One is the values when we put the mulch material there, and the other is the values of the mulch layer at the harvesting time in October, June to October. So we have the natural grassland, which we also had. It had 137 kilograms per hectare, which would be 123 pounds per acre. Then we had the clover grass with 240, that would be 216 pounds per acre, and the clover grass silage with 277 pounds per acre of nitrogen, which we applied. So the green beams are nitrogen, then we have phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, and sulfur, which we measured. And the first thing what we realized, which is very interesting, the CN ratio. We had a CN ratio in the rye hairy vetch mixture at planting time of 30. Then the crop was growing over a few months, and at the harvest time, we had a CN ratio of 21. So what happened with the carbon? The carbon is respired by fungi. So as soon as this mulch is on the soil surface, fungi are taking over. They are growing on that material, and they take away the carbon and emit it as CO2. The next thing we see, the potassium is pretty high in the beginning, and at harvest time, almost all the potassium is gone off the mulch. You see that in all variations. The potassium is gone. So first of all, here what we see is what is there in the mulch. And now is the question, how is the dynamics of that nutrients? First of all, the mineralized N, how did it develop? In the beginning, we had a quite low N-min in June while we were planting, because after a cover crop, after a rye vetch mixture, there's almost nothing of mineralized N in the soil left. It's really all depleted of nitrogen. This you have to consider when you do direct planting. You saw the picture which I showed in the beginning of that Savoy cabbage, which was really poorly supplied with nitrogen. This is due to the low mineralized N in the beginning of a crop after a cover crop. Then in the control where we did not have any mulch, of course, the mineralized N was rising over the time. And at harvest time, everything was gone, which is a good sign. That is what we want. And the lower the CN ratio, the higher the mineralized N during the vegetation period. You see that here, for example, in clovergrass silage. It had a CN ratio of 16 and pretty high values showed up. But everything was taken up by the plant. You see also here, even in that case, in October, everything is gone. The mineralized N is about 30 kilograms per hectare, which is 27 pounds per acre. Now the interesting point comes in December, but first a question from Tom.
Explain where how the clovergrass silage is produced. It's the word silage, I guess, indicates that it's partially decomposed before you apply it.
It is produced in bales, in wrapped bales.
Okay, it's produced in wrap bales that are anaerobically digesting for a certain period of time before you put it on the field. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And this silage is really powerful. It really is a fertilizer, a very fast and potential fertilizer, as you can see. Now the interesting thing is, in December we measured the mineralized N again after harvest. So 3 months after harvest, the N-min raised again. In the control without mulch, it did. And also in the mulched variation, it did. But here, it was not the mulch material, it was not the residual mulch which raised the N-min, it was the crop residues mainly. That we see here in the control where we did not have any mulch. So it raised, of course, less, but the yield was also less. So we had less crop residues. You see this in this diagram. Here we have the yields, the yield in decitons per hectare. So it's that's how we measure yields in Germany. So the control without the mulch had about 500 decitons per hectare, and the lower the CN ratio, the higher the yield. So what we see here, it's not a comparison of systems, it's a fertilizing trial. You have to understand. So the mulch material has to be thought through like a fertilizer. And the lower the CN ratio, the more of the nitrogen and nutrients is released to the plant. That was, by the way, kohlrabi. It was a kohlrabi which is quite big and which we store over winter. Now the question is, how much is plant available? How much percent of the nitrogen is available for the plant? And for this question, we had this control in with the mulch material without any nutrients in order to have a picture of what is going on in the soil when the soil is covered. And this was our calculation basis for what is coming out of the soil when the soil is covered. So what we did is we measured the nitrogen and the nutrients in the plant, like in the yield and in the residues and in the roots. And then we subtracted from that value all the inputs we did. So the fertilizer, which we put in, it was liquid one and 100% available. Then we had the seedlings, then we had the nitrogen which was coming from the soil, and then everything else which was found in the plant and not covered by the input, that would be the nitrogen which was coming from the mulch. That's the calculation in short. I hope you can follow me. And what we found out is that with the CN ratio of 30, about 20% of the nitrogen is available for the plant. So when we have a total nitrogen content of 224 kilograms of N in the rye hairy veg, which has a CN ratio of 30, 20%, that would be 45 kilograms per hectare, is available for the crop. With a CN ratio of 16, which was a clover grass silage, about 57% of the nitrogen is available for the plant. So when we have about 400 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare in the mulch material times 0.57, it would be 230 kilograms of nitrogen available for the plant. So we made also a difference between the uptake and the release. So what was released and what was taken up by the plant. And that is how we calculate. So this year when we made this trial, it was a pretty wet year. We had always enough water supply. And so I think rather more than is available. You see, I put here a range. So the wetter the years, the more is available. The drier the years, the less is available for the plants. This experiment we are repeating now for 4 years. We are now in the 2nd year, and the results of this year still wait to be analyzed. I hope you could follow me. Do you have questions to that? Scott?
Yeah, is there an impact of time and let's say training your microbes to take advantage of the mulch? In other words, are your systems more effective the 3rd year than the 1st year only because the plants are better or the soil is better at providing the microbes that have the fungi develop and get their nutrients above ground instead of below ground? Does the 1st year, is it work just as well as the 3rd year?
I don't know.
Now you sound like a California farmer.
German farmers are the same. But I guess maybe, yeah, I guess so. But I cannot prove it to you. Your microphone is off, Scott?
Yeah, sorry. What have you observed without a calculation? What's your gut feeling that you've seen?
I've seen that the mulch material is pretty potent. So even in the 1st year, you can have really good results. You don't have to wait many years. The system somehow kicks off quite fast. That's what I've seen, but it improves over time. That's what I would say.
All right, thank you.
We have seen that these effects also after the 1st year when we take over a new field, for example, it really, we don't have to wait for anything there, but it improves. Also, it improves by raising humus contents. I think that's an issue too, or influence too on that. Yeah. And Tom?
So on the left side of this graph where you have the rain clouds above and the sun below, if you drag that sun down to 10% in a in a climate that we're operating in California, practically our entire growing season is without rain. And most of our crops are being irrigated with drip irrigation, possibly on the surface of the ground or just below to supply the plant with moisture.
Yes.
But if you had a mulch layer such as yours on the surface, the mulch itself would be virtually dry for the whole growing season. So if you drug that sun down to 10%, then you would probably be releasing very little nutrient from the mulch system to the crop. Is that a correct supposition?
Yes, I think that's correct in a way, but you have to consider also with the drip irrigation, depending on the soil type, of course, the more clay content, the better. The water from the drip irrigation is going sideways, yeah. And that area between soil and mulch will be wet all the time. And here, most of the decomposition takes place. So you will have a nutrient effect for sure with drip irrigation, but it will be better when you have precipitation, because then the mulch is decomposing from the top as well.
So when we set up a system like this and we put plastic mulch over it and then plant through that, we do get very good performance. But that in the absence of the plastic mulch or overhead irrigation with sprinklers, we're experiencing yield drags and lack of mineralization from all the material that we're leaving on the surface. And that's our big problem here in California. Yeah.
We
But
have,
this-
yeah, sorry.
Well, this is fascinating data that you have here, and I presume that you have a lot of support from some good university people in Germany to help you. Are you in touch with the Jenna project and the people that?
No, we are not in touch. I know of that project, but we are not in touch with them.
Okay.
No. We are more in touch with the University of Gießen and Kassel, and they do a lot of mulch system research since years now. Yeah.
Oh, this is fantastic. Thank you.
So, yeah, I'm sorry I don't have data for California. I guess, Jeff Mitchell, you have to do that. And I also read some things from you, but that is the things we do here. So what would be very interesting actually would be the data from this year, which we still couldn't analyze yet. But in the next weeks, I think I will have some data and I could also share it with you. That would be under very dry conditions with almost no rain. So I'm looking forward to these data. Good. I continue, yeah, with the presentation. The question is, of course, also what's with the potassium. The potassium, we already saw in the beginning that almost all potassium is gone. And you see here, between 88 and 69% of the potassium is released from the mulch material into the soil. We see that in a peak also of potassium concentration in the soil, and we see that also of higher potassium concentration in the plant material. And that's maybe also an interesting thing, you know, that potassium is has a task in the plant to now I missed some English words again, but I summarize it maybe like this, that potassium makes the plants more efficient in water uptake. Am I right here?
That's correct. Yeah.
And it also makes it more efficient in the transport of amino acids in the plant into the roots and the root exudates and so on. So I think that here we have also a tool in our hands to increase efficiency. And the
Johannes?
next question, yes, sorry.
Regarding potassium, if you've got potassium that's effectively loading into your soil with these additional mulch, with each successive mulch addition, and you mentioned balancing soils in the Kinsey approach, are you having to import calcium, or are you not running into imbalances because of excess potassium?
We have to import calcium, definitely. We do have, because our soils from nature here, they have very low calcium supply or calcium contents. So we start here with the pH of, if you do nothing, we have a pH of 4.5. And we make it up to 6.5 or 6 or 6.5. That's how we are at the moment. And we have to keep that. We have to do something to keep it all the time. So the calcium is an issue. We have to, and I know that they are Wechselwirkung. There's an influence between potassium and calcium, definitely. So, but what we see over the years now, doing the Kinsey probe analysis, that potassium is not getting out of control, actually. So when we have the mulch material, it's actually a very balanced fertilizer. When the soil is balanced on the soil where we are growing our mulch material, then the mulch material is also balanced. It's a balanced fertilizer which we apply. The phosphate, how much is plant available? It's between 37 and 70% is available for the plant. Yeah, the phosphate. These are the numbers for phosphate. That's only 1 year results. More years are to come. Now the question is, when is the nitrogen available? For that question, we measured the nitrogen supply status of the plants. For this, we measured with the Yara N tool. It's measuring the intensity of the green color in the plants. So the greener the leaf, the more nitrogen, the better the nitrogen supply. That's the way that tool works. So the interesting thing is that you see here the blue curve is the curve without mulch, and the orange curve is the curve with mulch. And you see here the first month, the leaves are greener without mulch. Then the situation changes after 4.5 weeks. About the leaves with the mulch, they become greener than without the mulch. So what we see here, the mulch material is slow. The first 4 to 5 weeks, not much is to be expected from the mulch layer. After that, it is a pretty continuous source of nitrogen. So that's why I also said in the beginning, we are still doing an underfoot dressing of small content of nitrogen or of fertilizer in order to bridge these first 4 weeks. So yeah, and another research. I hope I'm not coming with too many numbers now, but that's what he wanted, right? We made another trial, and in this trial we worked with Brussels sprouts, and I don't want to explain the whole thing to you. I just want to draw your attention to V3 and 4, to these two variations, variation 3 and 4. So these variations, they were both with mulch. And I added up the total N availability now for that Brussels sprouts in kilograms per hectare, of course. And you see here in variation 3, we had mulch plus underfoot dressing or fertilizer of 57 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. And in variation 4, we did not fertilize anything for the planting. So you see we had this available, these amounts, 380 and 327 kilograms of nitrogen. And the plants, they took up 347 kilograms per hectare, and in this variation, 176. How does this come? Although 327 kilograms were available from our calculation, and also you see that also in the variation of 3, where the same mulch was applied. So when we have the balance there, 37 kilograms were not taken up by the plant in variation 3, and 151 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare were not taken up by variation 4. You see that also in the yield. We had 26 tons of yield in variation 3 and 14 tons of yield in variation 4. Tom.
So the amount of starter fertilizer you said was 57 pounds, 57 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. That's actually pounds of nitrogen, or kilograms of nitrogen, not the weight of the entire fertilizer, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
It's about 51 pounds of nitrogen per acre.
So per acre, that would only be maybe 25 pounds of N, if somebody can help me with the math. Or 30 pounds maybe, huh? So what I'm seeing, I've been doing a lot of reading this year on what we call soil priming, and that's not a very huge amount of nitrogen. It's a pretty modest amount of nitrogen, but when you look at the total result of the uptake in the crop, it looks like it's a very strong soil priming effect, because it's kickstarting the whole system, and the end result, the difference in the end result with or without it is just stunning.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this was priming. I mean, priming, I believe in priming effect, in the priming effect as well, but that would be a very strong priming effect. And we also did not incorporate that fertilizer in the soil. It was just on the soil surface. So I don't think it's all due to priming.
What was the form of the nitrogen that you used?
The form of nitrogen was organic bound nitrogen. It was a fertilizer with 6% of nitrogen.
Would it have been a protein nitrogen?
Yeah, it was. It's a nitrogen. It's a fertilizer which comes from the food industry.
So it's probably amino acid based, right?
Yes, I think so too.
Okay,
yeah.
But if it wasn't a strong priming effect, how do you explain the difference in almost twice the amount of nitrogen taken up in the crop with it versus almost half of the nitrogen taken up without it.
I guess it is. When the mulch, the fertilizer was a fast one, so it was fast available, and you see that also in the mineralized N values of that crop, in all variation, pretty low N min values during the period of growth. You see that these in the middle. So what I think is that the fertilizer pushes the plants in the juvenile development, and the stronger the plant after in the juvenile state, the higher the possibility or the ability of the plant to utilize the nutrients from the mulch layer. It had more photosynthesis, more area for photosynthesis. So this ammonium nutrition could take place. So the roots went stronger into the mulch layer, and it was just a stronger plant, and the stronger plant could utilize all the potential from that mulch layer. That's the theory we have.
Sure. And even though you say you're applying this on the surface or maybe just below the surface because you transplanted this crop, is that correct?
Say again.
You transplanted this crop with your transplanting machine where your
Yes.
where your fertilizer is going right at kind of the level of the plant establishment. So, and if you have roots growing up into your mulch layer, then they would be accessing this pretty well. But also, I think your theory is a good one, but you can also explore another theory that you're kickstarting the microbial system to digest and mineralize at a higher rate earlier in the crop. And this is very fascinating. Thank you.
I guess also
We see something similar to that in New York when we plant corn. We have a cool spring. If we have a very wet weather in excess of rainfall, it leaches out the NO3, the nitrate form of nitrogen, faster than our microbes can mineralize it. And if we put even 20 pounds of sodium nitrate, that's natrium Stickstoff per acre, we get a huge increase in yield, because I think it feeds the microbes that are needed to convert the nitrogen into NO3. Neil Kinsey observed something else that's parallel to this. He talks about having to put an ammonia form of nitrogen on earlier on wheat in order to get a certain plant enzyme to form. And that plant enzyme is cytokinins. And the NO3 nitrate is the precursor that the plant has to have to produce cytokinins, which would be, from what Johannes, what you said, that would be one of the growth stimulatory effects in the plants if that's deficient. I don't know if that would fit what you've seen, but I think both things could be happening.
Yeah. What I find interesting that the NO3 values are pretty low throughout the vegetation period of the Brussels sprout. In the beginning, they're normally rising, but then it's on a very low state. And I think
In the plant, I mean.
Say again?
And that is in the tissue of the plant?
No, in the soil.
Okay, so the plant may be taking them up very rapidly, or as rapidly as they're being released.
Yes, exactly. And normally you say for Brussels sprouts, you need at least 100 kilograms per hectare of NO3 when they start making these sprouts, you know?
Yes.
And we never reach that, but we have conventional yields on our Brussels sprouts. So this shows to me that a lot is happening in that mulch layer. So the soil is bypassed, so to say, not completely, but the nitrogen uptake is not taking place in the soil, but it's taking place in the mulch layer mainly.
Yes. We saw a similar thing in our field corn in wet weather, that there was far more nitrogen ended up in the crop than what the soil test would have predicted the crop should have taken up.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I am not understanding everything fully, what is happening. And especially with the priming effect of fertilizer, maybe this has an influence, but I'm not sure. I don't know yet. I don't know yet. And we have another hand now from yeah, please go ahead.
Just a question, are you using any seed primers, things that might accelerate the colonization of root hairs and you know, in your seedlings or in your transplants, anything else to stimulate the microbial creation and uptake of nitrogen and begin to affect that balance?
No, we don't. We don't. We tried once something, but we didn't continue anything with that. We are not, and it's not also not in these Brussels sprouts. Definitely not. No.
Yeah, Johannes on. I just did a little calculation on your dry vegetable-based amino acid fertilizer. You're putting on maybe 1,000 kilograms per hectare.
Yes.
And I see with your mulch-tech planter that is going right on the surface, and your transplant is actually below that. So there must be a lot of biology going on at that surface to mulch layer. And the roots have to get up to that. It seems like it'd take a little while to grow into it. So I have a couple different questions. Instead of a plant-based fertilizer, something like a feather meal fertilizer, which I think you might have mentioned, if I understand your comparison to carotene. So one question is how a feather meal protein fertilizer would compare to your veg fertilizer. And then, you know, we've generally tried to put that slightly below either the transplant or where we're direct seeding, so that that breaks down and is available for the plant roots almost pretty quickly to grow into that. So it's two different systems and the concepts are different, but can you make comments on either of those?
Okay, yes. First of all, to the planter again, it does not apply the fertilizer on the top of the soil. It applies it under the seedlings. I was just mentioning in that specific trial of Brussels sprouts, we were spreading the fertilizer by hand on the soil surface before we applied the mulch. So that was maybe confusing a bit from my side. But here you see again the planter, the fertilizer is falling down here through that shoe underneath the seedlings, and the seedlings are here. So that's the same, first of all. And so the plants, they grow into it, not up, but down into it. And other farms, they use the carotene fertilizers with our machine as well. So, and they are fine too. I don't know of any differences here yet. Of course, there can be differences, but cannot tell of any.
Yeah, thank you.
What you have to be careful though is when we once used the ammonium fertilizer with 8% ammonium. It was an organic one, and this ammonium has to be placed under the seedlings, and it must not touch the stem of the seedling, otherwise it burns it off. So that's why we are very keen to place everything below the seedlings. And Tom again?
So again, you're using an enzymatically hydrolyzed fertilizer that's in the form of amino acids, which really don't have to be transformed any further biologically for plant uptake. They're actually immediately available to the plant, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're pretty fast. So in 6 weeks, they are empty, I would say.
So even in wetter and cooler conditions, because your mulch is actually cooling the soil,
Yes.
That type of fertilizer is much more immediately available to the plant, I would say, versus something that is an entire protein that has to be biologically digested.
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes.
Thank you.
And it's what we want. We want it for a juvenile period of the crop.
Exactly. Thank you. Mhm.
Okay, so I'm going on in my presentation. I have a few more things for you. Maybe just one small point. After these Brussels sprouts, we learned when we did the beetroots, after Brussels sprouts without mulch, beetroots without mulch, we saw that about 40 kilograms of nitrogen was more was available for the crop. I'm wrong. May I say it again? For the mineralized N-min at the seeding time of the beetroots was 40 kilograms higher in the mulched variations from the previous year. So at least 40 kilograms per hectare is available for the crop to come in the year after. So it's not only a fertilizer for the first year, we see the yield effect 3 years later of the mulch material. Okay, I have 15 minutes left. I go through a few more points on temperature and water, and then we can discuss. Yeah, I go pretty fast through because I think you know most of the points, I guess. So one thing, we measured the soil temperature at a depth of 12 centimeters, and you see here that a mulch layer is insulating the soil, so you have less ups and downs. But you have to consider also that in springtime, soil is slower in warming up, and that's an issue maybe in cooler regions, and we have to be careful there. That's why we start planting with some crops after the last frosts in March. On the other hand, we measure the soil surface temperature under hot conditions. This year, at the 20th of July at 10 o'clock in the morning at 29 degrees, we measured 43 degrees Celsius, which is in Fahrenheit. I don't know, but it's pretty hot. It's where protein is denaturating. It's about 109 degrees Fahrenheit. My wife just tells me. So that is on the soil surface without mulch. Then next to it, a few meters further, we had 16 degrees Celsius under the mulch, which would be 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's amazing. You know that soil temperatures above 25 degrees is harming the roots. And I had to dig down 10 centimeters without mulch to find soil which was cooler than 30 degrees. And that's pretty hot. So what we are doing actually here without the mulch is we are creating a dusty mulch layer on our soil. And these first 10 centimeters, they are gone for the plant. They are not usable. And with the mulch layer, we can utilize even the first centimeters of the soil, which are normally the most fertile part of the soil. So That's a plus on hot temperatures. In cold temperatures, though, here you see our onions partly with mulch, partly without mulch. And you see the frost on the mulch and no frost without the mulch. Here, what we are missing is the radiative heat, which protects the leaf from frost. We are insulating it away with the mulch layer. So early crops are more, they're more sensitive, or not sensitive, but the mulch gives the plants a harder time with frosts. Let's say it like this. Water. Climate change is not only dry. Climate change can be also very wet. That is what we are experiencing both. So heavy rainfalls, then long periods of dry weather again. So it's extremes. And you see here at the right side, the picture, the left, it's with mulch, on the right, it's without mulch. So under the mulch, you have a very crumbly structure. And so water can infiltrate very easily. What we always do, we make an infiltration test and we find out that 100 liters per square meter, that would be 40 inches. Yeah, 40 inches of water per square meter. They infiltrate in 2 minutes. With the mulch, without the mulch, can take longer. The mulch is not the only point, soil structure is the other point, but mulch has a very great impact on that infiltration rate. So what we actually have to do in climate change is infiltrate a lot of water in a short time and then store it in our soils. And that's the other point. You see a plant, we have transpiration, which is productive, and we have evaporation, which is unproductive water loss. Soil cover takes away some of the evaporation. The question is still how much of the evaporation. Some say 90%, some say 70%, some say 50%. I think I don't know yet. What I realize with our mulch system, I would say it's 90% with the grass mulch or with the rye mulch, but it's hard for us to, or we did not yet do that experiment. We have some, I looked in the literature a bit, but I guess maybe you, Jeff, or others are better in numbers there. But what we see is when our soil is wet after transplanting, either by rain or by irrigation, it can take easily 6 weeks without rain and the soil stays wet without any further irrigation. What happens here is that the seedlings, which are very small still, they have not a lot of transpiration yet. So there's not much water loss through transpiration. The evaporation is stopped more or less, or mainly almost by the mulch layer. And like this, we could in this year with 3 months almost without rain, or 2.5 months without rain, we did not need to irrigate all our crops. For example, the leeks, they did not get 1 drop of water from irrigation in that time because transpiration was low and evaporation was almost nothing. Later on, when the crop starts with biomass production and transpiration is rising, that can change pretty quickly, of course. And that's when we needed to start irrigation this year. And our crops, they did not get more than 40 liters per square meter. That would be, yeah, so much of water. And that was the highest we irrigated. Some could have taken the double, I would say, some cabbages, but that's all they got, and they're fine. They have a good yield now. We have an experiment running this year with which on the kohlrabi again, and we measured water content in the soil. And you see in this diagram the precipitation here and the irrigation. The brown parts are the irrigation. So in the beginning of the planting, we irrigated 5 millimeters while planting with our planter. And then later, after planting, we put another 20 millimeters there. And then we had very little rain until September. And then we had pretty much rain. And you see here the brown curve is without mulch, and the green curve is with mulch. And you see here the water content in percent. And after irrigation, the soil was still wet, and then it went down. So the water content of the soil which was not covered went down more quickly than the water content in the soil with mulch. It came down to the same point. Why? Because of transpiration. It doesn't mean that the soil under mulch is always wetter than without mulch. It is just wetter in the beginning. Later on, due to even higher transpiration, that can change. The soil can be drier under the mulch. But you see the yields here in both variations. Here it's with grass silage, and here is without mulch. We had much higher yield. We had, I think, 45% more yield with the mulch. That means much more transpiration, and that means the soil becomes dry. So what we actually have to do here in future, we have to see with how much water can we get which yield and which system is more efficient. Yeah, that is what I can say to the water topic. And I think there are many aspects to that still. One thing maybe I want to show you as another effect of mulch. In that experiments we do, we sometimes see very stunning things. You know the cabbage white, that butterfly? You see that here they ate the kohlrabi without mulch. A few centimeters further, with mulch, there was no damage at all. And that was the whole plot was looking like this. And in all 4 repetitions, we had that picture. And here you see that was highly significant. University of Kassel came and looked to that damage, and they're making a project from that. But that is pretty interesting, actually. And they have the same results in potatoes with the Colorado beetle. Is it also Colorado beetle in your country? It's
Yes, same name.
The potato
Okay.
beetle, yeah. Colorado potato beetle.
Okay. Yeah, so question is what's happening here, and we don't know. But that we can see that often, such results. Yeah, I have 3 minutes left. I'm sorry for that. I wanted to talk about economics, but I leave it for now. From my side, I could do 15 minutes more, but I also would like to hear your questions still, or your comments, or whatever your plans are still for that meeting, Patrick.
Yeah, the meeting is open-ended, so we can go as long as you can hold us, Johannes.
Okay. Okay. So if you have some questions, just ask them as usual.
Okay.
Yeah, the economics. We are calculating actually each crop, which we do, and we took 3 years of stop watching our times while we work and so on. And now we have some data, and we compared the different system for our farm. So it's on our farm. It's not on each farm, I think, has to calculate by itself. But what we found out is that I compared here leeks with 3 rows on the bed without mulch, 3 rows on the bed with mulch, and with mulch 4 rows on the bed, which we actually do. And what we see here, these are costs per 1,000 square meters. Yeah. We have costs for seedlings, 500 euros. In the mulch variation, we have more costs for seeds because we also have to pay the cover crop. And in the 4-row mulch system, we have even more costs because we have a higher density of plants. The fertilizer is higher in the unmulched system because the mulch is fertilizer itself, and we can reduce the fertilizer costs here quite a bit. That's one point. And packaging, of course, is the same, only with the 4 rows, it's higher because we have a higher yield. You see here, I took the same yield, marketable yield of about 4 kilograms per square meter, and with 5.5 kilograms per square meter in the 4-row mulch system. The machine costs, the variable machine costs, that means fuel mainly, is lower without mulch. Why? Because hoeing the crop is cheaper. It takes less power than spreading a mulch or flail mowing a mulch. Yeah. So it's a bit more expensive in the mulch variation. Wages, they are higher in the system without mulch because hoeing takes more time than creating a mulch layer. Then harvest and delivery costs are the same in these two systems, only in the 4-row mulch system it's higher because we have higher yields. The field rent is lower in the system without mulch because we don't have to produce a mulch on another field, which we do in these two variations. Fixed machine costs, that means costs for buying machines. They are lower in the system without mulch because the machinery is cheaper. Here in the mulch systems, I have to buy a loader wagon, I have to buy a more expensive planting machine. So it's higher here. But all in all, I have, first of all, these are the costs. So the costs are 2,900 euros without mulch, 2,600 euros without with mulch, and 3,100 euro in the 4-row system. But the profit contribution is 3,500 in this system, 3,800 in this system. So you see the costs are not much different here, and they can vary, of course. But what we see here, we are not more expensive with the mulch layer. What I put in here already in the wages, 50 hours of weeding per hectare, hand weeding, because of some perennial crops, weeds, I assumed. So, but it can also go for the worse, of course, but both systems have their ins and outs. So, but they are more or less on the same level. Now, when we increase the plant density, which we normally do in the system, then we have more costs, but a higher profit contribution because of higher yields. And as soon as yields are higher, you can do almost everything to produce a higher yield. So all in all, we are on our farm better off using the mulch system than going without the mulch. Of course, now I would like to make some scenarios with you to calculate what ifs, but we don't have the time for that. I think everybody can do that for himself and see how it fits to his or her farm. How is the working hours? How are they distributed, and the machine hours? without mulch, you know the system probably you plant and you irrigate, and then you have the weed control, and then the harvest. With mulch, you have more machine times, so more tractor hours for the planting, because you have to spread the mulch that comes on top of it. So before you are able to plant, you have to do more hours in the mulch system. But after planting, you can go to holidays because, I mean, almost, but you have less hours until harvest. You just maybe have a weed control by hand if something happens, and maybe irrigate once or twice. That's it. So this is what we see. We have a peak of hours during planting season, much more than without mulch. And then later on in August, we really have less to do until harvest starts. That's the economic in and outs of the mulch system, very roughly. I have some thing about the greenhouse, but I think I leave it with this. I'm not sure if some greenhouse farmers are there, but I think the focus was the open fields.
Johannes, can you go back one slide to your accounting? On the mulch itself, if you're producing that somewhere else and then carrying it over, how do you account for that here? And I'm thinking of it in my own context. We have very expensive, or what will become very expensive, water right now.
Yes.
And producing biomass will come at a high cost. So I'm curious if you can unpack some of these costs relative to the mulch itself.
I only put the costs of the field rent in, but it's about 200 euros or 300 euros more, depends on which crop, to produce that mulch material. No, I'm sorry, that's in here. So what is in here is sowing the cover crop, the mulch material, and mowing it and raking it and loading it. This is in already on that accounting. So and the field rent is in there as well, but no water, because normally we have water for that. So it might be more expensive on your area in California, for example, that when you have to, yeah. But I would say that it would be a totally different scenario, which I would be willing to calculate through and would be very curious about to calculate through. Yeah, what would you say? How is that applicable to your situation in California and Colorado, and which is an arid climate, of course? I'm talking here of a very normal climate, I would say.
Yeah, I'm thinking of an area where we effectively have a budget, a certain amount of water that we may have available, but we can't go beyond, whether that's a financial constraint or a physical constraint by state mandate. And so it would be working through how many acres of productive land during a season warm enough to grow something might we need in order to harvest forage for silage, in order to have a mulch for next year on some smaller number of productive acres. So that's where my mind goes. It's not necessarily utilizing every acre every year in a complex rotation. It may be favoring certain acres for higher intensity mulch.
I understand. Also, the question would be how much water would the cover crop or the mulch production need, and how much water can we save through a mulch in a crop? So what is the balance in the end? I know that with a cover crop, the water balance is negative. So you better have bare soil and then irrigate your crop than doing a cover crop before. But what is if you use that cover crop as a mulch material? That would be a question worthy for the University of California. Or do you have some numbers there already?
Yeah, Jeff has research in that regard on cropping systems and from his 5 points study sites, reduced tillage and no tillage on cover crops and water balance. You mentioned that the effect from the cover crops is a net negative on water unless you can go into that same soil. So as I understood that, you're effectively harvesting from one place and then carrying on to the other. So you have a
Both.
Mhm.
We are mainly using the cover crop on spot in situ. But we're just adding some if we need. So that would be the question, actually also which we have some literature studies, of course, we did and looked into it, and we see that about half the water is used to keep up a crop. I mean, no, let me say it again. You need half the water to have the same yield in the end with mulch. That's what we read in literature. And the farmer in Austria, he put everywhere the same amount of water on both crops, and he had not rain in the celeriac, and he had 50% higher yields in the celeriac with mulch. So these are the questions we still have, and which I cannot answer you, although it was a question for me from your side.
Yeah, I have heard a recorded presentation by Jan Hendrik Kropp, who's a contemporary of yours, I think. And he mentioned in his comments about deep mulch systems that they may be too water costly for arid or Mediterranean climates. I don't know if you've seen the system that you're describing applied in drier climates than what you're managing, or in more Mediterranean or arid climates yet.
We have a machine in Italy as well, but I think they have a similar. They are warmer, but they have similar rain. I don't see it yet applied. It's only in the neighboring countries of Germany yet. So, but also in Germany we have places with 300 millimeters of rain, for example, and they're using the machine too. 300 millimeters would be an inch. 300.
$10 inches.
Yeah, something like this. 11 inches. Yeah. So we have the situations here in Germany as well. But what we have heavy winter rain. So we are starting always with a good soil moisture in spring. That's what we always do have. And that might be the difference to your climate, I suppose.
Are you direct seeding into these mulch systems, or is it almost all transplants? And have you found, I mean, we've direct seeded things like melons and cucumbers, very sensitive stems when they emerge into a heavier mulch, and have found predation, insects will, there's some things that work really well and some things that don't work. What's your experience there with crops and how much direct seeding are you doing?
We tried direct seeding of pumpkins, and depends a bit on the mulch layer. So what we saw, when you have a mulch layer like this, 3 inches, the emerging of these seeds is very bad. So you cannot do that actually. Insects were eating the seeds. When there's a roll cover crop, for example, that works well. But I have not more experience. I just have this experience with the cabbage, with the pumpkins. We had some experience with carrots, but not enough. Yesterday I explained some trials, but we are going to into these topics more, to direct seed carrots into a mulch system and leave the slit open. They are not able to emerge through a mulch layer, so would have to leave a slit open that they be able to see the light one day.
Yeah, I think that's the hard part.
There was a comment at a growers meeting that Scott went to and I went to about the impacts of having green material and the light wavelength that is emitted from those materials that will actually inhibit the growth of a plant. Are all your mulches by the time you plant or transplant effectively dead that you're planting into?
Normally they are still green. Mostly they are still green. But what do you mean green? I mean green, they are dead, but green. Or what do you mean with lightweight?
Well, it was most of this was direct seeded corn and soybeans, but they talked about the impact of what the emerging plant sees, or the wavelength of light it's receiving, yes, and its then response, its growth response, because it maybe get the message that it's going to be in a really competitive environment and it doesn't grow as vigorously. So that the green wavelength that comes off, the light wavelength was what somebody talked about as an inhibitor if you're planting into green mulches, is what they were doing, and that they were rolled down.
Okay, so yeah.
No, go ahead.
So what you're saying is that green mulch inhibits plant growth because the plant sees competition around itself. Is that right?
That seems to be what they were talking about, yeah.
Interesting. I don't know about it. I don't see any difference. Can be maybe it's an influence. I can't tell. Yeah.
Fred, did you have a question?
Yeah, yesterday you showed us how you water the seedlings right at transplanting time with a little hose behind the mulch-direct planter. And you said you had a picture of later in the season you would water dragging a hose. Do you have a picture of that you wanted to show?
I have to look it up. Actually, it's just I think you're better off with your drip irrigation if you have it installed it anyway. You know, we are not a specialist for irrigation. You are, I guess. So I better not make it showing off with my irrigation system here now. But it's actually just, as I explained. But I think you have more knowledge about that.
Well, great. I'm certain you've stirred the pot and the imaginations of everybody here by their expressions through these hours. And I'm grateful to you for taking the time to visit with us and relay what you've learned. And hopefully we can maintain contact. I'm sure there will be more questions, and hopefully we'll have opportunities to meet in person someday and see more of what you've done. Fred, I know you're building yourself effectively a business to be able to get this equipment into the United States, and hopefully as you do that, we'll hear more from you too.
Yeah, if I could ask one more question, this is
Sure.
Klaus. We've had a lot of experience with the roller crimper and a lot of spectacular failures in New York. And all of the spectacular failures have been due to the crop continuing to use a massive amount of water after it's terminated.
Interesting.
Where it's kinked, but it hasn't stopped the respiration. And it will sufficiently dry out the surface so that the seeds stop growing until there's a rain. We sometimes can go 4 to 6 weeks waiting for another rain.
Yeah.
Do you ever use that system, or do you always use the flail shredder on the front? It seems to me if we went to the flail and mulch to terminate, we might avoid that problem.
Yeah, we started with the roller crimper actually. I saw that from Roller Institute. I got these plans and I built me one roller crimper, and we crimped our cover crops for 3 or 4 years, and we had failures too, mainly failures. Actually no, 3 or 4 times we had good crops. 1 time on my farm and 3 times on other farms, and the rest was failures. Mainly to rodents on our farm.
Okay.
Whereas the shredded mulch just next to it with the same rodent pressure was beautiful.
Okay, we had excellent results when we had excessive rain.
Yeah, okay.
So in years when it rained so much nobody could plant their crops, the no-till came out beautiful and was yielded better because the water used by the cover crop was helping it. But we didn't realize when we started this that there was so much water being transpired by that crimped crop after it was terminated.
Interesting, yeah. This can be, our situations were rather wet, I guess, also in this time. Another problem was the hairy vetch is quite difficult to kill.
Yes.
So we had to roll 3 times in order to terminate the hairy vetch. And yeah, this was, and then we sometimes stirred up some soil, and then seed weeds were emerging and so on. So and the other point is you can only do it once per year when the cover
Right.
crop is at perfect stage. Then you can do it. The rest of the year you cannot do it. So we thought, okay, I have my seedlings here. I cannot wait 2 weeks. I want to do it now. And then we flail mowed it, and by this the hairy vetch is terminated anyway at any stage, and this made us more flexible, the system with the flail mower and adding some extra mulch if needed.
Okay, the other question I would have is we're experimenting based on Margaret Sakara's work with using FAPS, fodder, futterraps,
Yes.
as a cover crop. She indicated that we could increase the water storage capacity of the soil
Yes.
by using a crop that aggregates the soil more deeply than other crops. Is that, have you have any experience with that or any opinion on that?
I read the book many times and I love it. It's really, it's one of the best books on soil fertility, I would say. And we're using that too, but we never did the Rapsdecke, the Krümmeldecke. You know that it's a German word. I'm sorry for that. It's canola. No, not canola. It's rapeseed.
Canola is the same species, but we use forage rape here.
Forage rape, yeah. And to incorporate it shallow into the soil, right?
Yes, but I could see with a shredder that it might be effective to use your flail mower on the front and have it in a mixture with other cover crops.
Aha, yeah. I mean, we are always heading for mixtures in cover crops, of course. And we sometimes do this, that we do this incorporating into the soil very shallow. But we rather use it as mulch meanwhile, actually. The effect, I would say, is at least the same.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Klaus. Well, if there are more questions, now's your time. Otherwise, we'll send Johannes off to, well, to visit with his wife. Yeah.
Just
Thank you.
wanted to say thank you. It's an awesome presentation, and really appreciate your generosity of sharing all of your experience and knowledge, and the dedication you have to collecting data and analyzing what you're doing and trying to figure out why it's working. And that's something that we're not as far down the road on here, but very much appreciate your sharing. Thank you.
Thank you too. I'm happy sharing, and it was a pleasant time to exchange experiences and thoughts with you guys over there. And maybe I have one question to you. Do you know Ron Morse, and do you know if he's still alive?
I believe so, Johannes. Yes, and Ron Morse, for those of you who don't know, Johannes introduced him yesterday. Ron Morse, way back in 1993, was at Virginia Tech. He's still in Blacksburg, Virginia. Johannes, I don't think he passed away. No, he has Parkinson's disease, but he's still going on. I've written letters to him in the last couple of years, I think. But he worked with Arif Abdul-Baki at the USDA in Beltsville, Maryland. And when I was still a student way back in 1992, I think, there was a meeting in Florida, and they introduced the first no-till transplanter at that meeting, Johannes. And it was the beginning of the rest of everything we're doing. So it was really a big thing. So Johannes is bringing up really one of the pioneers, Ron Morse and Abdul-Baki, that were out there many, many years ago. It was a fun time.
I believe so. Yeah, if you have contact with him, maybe greet him from my side. I don't know him, or he doesn't know me, but maybe just report that the work continued he started. I tried to reach him, but I couldn't find out how I can reach him. So
all right, I can do that. There's a guy that's at Virginia Tech. His name is Greg Wellbaum, and he used to be a student with the same time that I was at Davis. So Greg, he's still in the Department of Horticulture there, and he knows Ron. I'll send you the contact, but it was a fond memory there. Thank you, Johannes.
Thank you too. Thank you.
Great.
Do you give
everyone.
tours on? Do you give tours on your farm, or?
Yeah, we do. We have field days once per year, at least once per year. But in August, the first Tuesday in August, we have each year a field day here, a big day with machine demonstration, with universities coming, showing results, and it's a mulch day.
Okay.
Yeah.
My son married a girl from Husum in Schleswig-Holstein.
Good. Yeah. Well, you can come by.
Yes. Ich habe vor 50 Jahren fast kein Deutsch gesprochen, aber ich habe ganz viel wiederholt.
Sehr gut. Schön.
So thank you.
Thank you also.
Okay, thanks everybody, and we'll see you another day.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you all.
very much.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
And thank you, Patrick, for setting this whole thing up.
You bet.
You're a good guy.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording and